Peppa and George decided to take a walk in the forest and stumbled upon an old, abandoned house. It looked very gloomy. Broken windows, overgrown bushes, creaky door. Inside, it was dark and cold. Cracked portraits hung on the walls. Their eyes seemed alive. Suddenly, it became dark outside the window. At that moment, a strange woman appeared. The owner of the house. Her face was pale, and her eyes were cold and frightening. She smiled strangely and said,
Welcome. You shouldn't have come here.
Suddenly, she began to change. Her face distorted. Her eyes shone with bright red light, and something black flowed out of them. Peppa tried to run, but the door slammed shut by itself. The demon owner grabbed Peppa and George with her long claws. Their screams disappeared into the darkness. Everything around started to distort. The house's owner dragged the children into her dark basement. Peppa and George were tied up. Their mouths were covered with rags. The owner was boiling something murky in a huge cauldron and muttered,
Soon I will enjoy this.
Peppa turned around and saw Susie and Rebecca. They were also tied up and trembling with fear. Suddenly, a familiar, sinister whisper sounded. The door opened. Standing in the doorway was Evie, with tentacles and a sinister smile. She grabbed the house owner with one of her tentacles and swallowed her with a sinister sound. Afterward, Evie smiled sweetly but continued to radiate horror. The children were scared. They already knew what awaited them. Evie wasn't full yet and was planning to fix that. Grandpa's letter. One day, our grandfather left and never came back. We searched for him, but it was no use. Half a year later, while going through his closet, I picked up Grandpa's coat and felt something in the pocket. I reached in, unfolded a note, and saw his handwriting. It said, My dear ones, this is not a farewell, not a will. It's a joke. I've been living in the forest with an old friend you've never met. Here's the address. Once you find this letter, come visit. I want to see your faces. A week later, we drove to the coordinates. The forest was deep, the road broken, no signal. The house was real, wooden, old. Inside, it smelled like firewood. We waited an hour, then 2. Night fell quickly. Something rustled outside. Dad went to check. He didn't come back. We were alone. George noticed. One of the cups was empty. Peppa turned around, but she wasn't looking at Mom anymore. She was staring at something behind her. The deleted episode of Peppa Pig. The porcelain doll. Peppa finds an old, dusty toy box in the attic. Inside is a large doll with a porcelain face, but it doesn't have a face, just a smooth white oval. What a strange doll, says Peppa, looking at her. George looks at the doll with apprehension and hides behind his mother. At night, it seems to Peppa that the doll is looking at her. She hears quiet whispers from her room, even though no one is there. The next morning, the doll is in a different place. Peppa tries to get rid of the doll, but it always comes back. One day, while playing with George, Peppa draws the doll's face with a marker pen. At first, it's funny, but at night, the face on the doll changes. Now it's an evil grimace with sharp teeth and glowing red eyes. Peppa is terrified. She realizes that the doll is alive and something bad is happening. She runs to Mama Piggy, but she doesn't believe her. At night, Peppa wakes up from the cold. She sees a doll by her bed. The doll stretches its porcelain hand towards her. Peppa screams, but no one comes. In the morning, Peppa disappears. George is playing alone in the garden, but he is no longer grunting with joy. He holds a faceless doll in his hands. Piggy's mom and dad are standing at the window, their faces full of despair. Their voices are barely audible. Where is our Peppa? Deleted Peppa Pig episode, The Living Toy. George loved his dinosaur, but that day, the toy fell into a place where it shouldn't have gone. George didn't know. Some toys find their owners on their own. When George disappeared, Peppa decided to look for him, but she had no idea. She would have to search not for her brother, but for what had taken him. The trail led to the nursery, where it all began. The door to the nursery swung open, and Peppa saw a giant dinosaur holding George in its claws.
Give him back!
Peppa shouted, but the dinosaur already knew his name. Peppa tried to rescue her brother, but the dinosaur swatted her away with its tail. George mumbled. His voice sounded strange, as if the dinosaur was learning how to be hidden. Peppa grabbed a toy hammer and struck the dinosaur's paw. It dropped George.
Run!
Peppa yelled, but George didn't move. His eyes turned red. In the morning, George returned, but Peppa saw that now the dinosaur was always watching him. At night, a voice was heard behind the door.
The little dinosaur. Mine.
He waiting, because children can be lost so easily, especially when they think they've been found. The pig family went on vacation to an old house in the middle of the forest. The house creaked with every step, and the trees outside the window didn't move even in the wind. Peppa and George were playing in the nursery. The parents were preparing food in the kitchen. At first, everything was going well. But in the evening, George noticed something outside the window.
He is already here,
he whispered. That night, George saw a silhouette of a strange tree through the window. He went outside to look at it. It was a mistake. In the morning, George was gone. Mom cried. Dad turned pale. The police didn't answer, so the parents went into the forest to look for him. They told Peppa not to go anywhere and not to open the door for anyone. Peppa was left alone. The parents walked along a creepy trail and ended up deep in the forest. Suddenly, they came across what had caused the nighttime sounds. A huge tree with arms and legs, eyes, and a creepy smile stood and looked at them. Meanwhile, Peppa was sitting in the living room. Suddenly, the TV turned on by itself. On screen was their forest. The camera slowly zoomed in on something between the trees. It was her parents hanging upside down. Then static and silence. Suddenly, the lights in the house went out. Fear gripped Peppa, but staying inside was dangerous. The monster knew where she was. Peppa tried to run through the forest to find help, but it had become denser than during the day. She walked along a trail and suddenly saw it. A creature resembling a tree. Tall, thin, yellow eyes, a huge mouth. It was staring directly at her.
Peppa, your family has been waiting.